My name is Gail Winbury, and today is Sunday. It is March 10th. I'm sitting in my studio in East Orange, New Jersey, in my favorite rocking chair that I sit in when I look at paintings. So welcome to my studio. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and grew up mostly in New Jersey. And growing up in New Jersey was important for a number of reasons. One being that I grew up outside of Manhattan. So that meant I spent a fair amount of time as a child going into Manhattan, going to museums, going to ballet, etc., taking in the cultural feast that was available in Manhattan. I am the second child of a family of scientists. So in some ways, I was the outlier in the family, although I really loved science, things like physics for poets. My mother and father were both hard scientists. However, I started out in art at a very young age because I grew up painting with my father as a little girl in the basement of our house. He, despite being a scientist, and he was a very creative person, was also a painter, and he painted impressionist landscapes. He always said to me, "You're the one with the imagination." And part of that meant that I didn't know any of the rules, so I wasn't afraid of taking risks. I think that stayed with me throughout much of my career as an artist. But I didn't go to art school, even though I loved art. When I was ready to go to art school, my mother said to me, "A woman has to earn a living." Many, many women were told that by their mothers. So I also loved psychology, and I became a psychologist. Psychology and art are not that far apart at all. And I think that my career as a psychologist, I was a practicing psychologist. I saw people for therapy, influenced how I approach painting, or maybe the way to say it is that who I am as a human being has influenced both my choice to be a therapist as well as my choice to do work that I think has psychological intent and purpose to it. I grew up in a middle-class family. We were not rich, we were not poor, we were somewhere in the middle. In terms of my biggest influences as an artist, the first that comes to mind is de Kooning. I have had this love-hate battle with de Kooning, even though he's been dead for a long time, for many, many years. I loved the gesture that he was able to make. I really loved the palette that he used and his marks, but at the same time, the misogyny in the work was really troublesome to me. So I think ultimately I stole his gestures. I took the pinks and salmons that he used and used them in a non-objectifying way. Much of my work, even though it is not directly figurative, does have figurative elements to it. And another one of my influences, we're talking about another male artist, was Picasso. And that was really as a child. I got to see his work when I would go to museums in New York. And I think I was particularly drawn to his line and his ability to render form in this incredibly beautiful way. In terms of the abstract expressionists as well as de Kooning, Joan Mitchell has been a tremendous influence. More recently, two other people come to mind that are from the canon of art. One is Agnes Martin, and while my work is very, very different from hers, her pencil line is exquisite, and there are times and moments in my painting where I want to bring that quality of line, and I often will draw and use graphite on my paintings. The other person that I'm intimately involved with right now, who is no longer living, is Matisse. And my current series is really influenced by Matisse, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. There's two other artists that I want to mention who are living artists, both of whom I have had the privilege of getting to know some and learning from them. And one is Joan Snyder, who is a painter, and I was able to be in a master class with her and learned an enormous amount. And the other one is another painter, a kind of painter that borders on abstraction and figuration, which is kind of where I am, and that's Brenda Goodman. And I've known Brenda Goodman to some degree and have had her critique my work in ways that really shifted my work forward. So those are the influences. What's the biggest challenge of being an artist? I think there's not one. But certainly the reality is being an artist can be very lonely. I'm in the studio by myself, but I'm lucky that I'm in a building with 65 other artists. I think the real challenge for me, is to dig deep inside myself and make something out of nothing. And that process of being creative is both exhilarating and very difficult. The other challenge really is to accept that there are periods as an artist when our creativity is kind of fallow and we either can't work or we work without feeling engaged with the work itself. There are times where I think, why didn't I go to art school sooner? But the reality is, as a woman, to be able to support myself as a psychologist, and I had a child, I was very, very fortunate, and I loved my work. So I'm not sure that I would say, oh, I should have gone to art school when I was 20. I see many young artists graduating from art school with lots of debt and having difficulty finding a job that pays more than minimum wage. So in many ways, the advice that I got from my mother was very, very good advice. In terms of the kinds of mediums that I work with, I predominantly work with oil paint and pigment sticks and graphite and charcoal. But I have worked with some non-traditional mediums in working with cold wax, in using the backs of brushes or dental tools or knives to etch into the surface of a painting and then maybe embed some pigment in there or embed some India ink in the canvas. I also work with collage, and in my collages I use discarded paintings of my own and found objects and a little bit of magazine. And I'm very conscious of negative space when I work with collages, and that certainly influenced my paintings. I absolutely listen to music when I paint. I do not like having a silent studio, because if there's a silent studio, I get in my head, and all of those critical voices that we all hear at times as artists are too loud. So if I'm listening to music, I completely get occupied. One part of my brain gets occupied in the music. I'm dancing, I'm in the moment, and the other part of my brain is painting. And so I think I can be more immediate and fresh with the work. One of the most wonderful experiences I ever had with a painting of mine, a 6-foot painting that was called A Monk's Pet Scam. It was a very ethereal painting, which was less about the body and more about the spirit. And this woman saw it, and she just started talking, and it was as if she had painted that painting. And I think that that moment of feeling like she got it in some profound way was really, really moving to me. I paint with the hopes that my paintings are communicating something emotionally that the viewer can feel and then at some point think about. I had a museum exhibition where it was all autobiographical paintings which were related to early childhood memory. And I didn't want anyone to know my personal narrative. What I hoped was that the work communicated something universal about childhood experiences, and that people would feel and access their own emotions and memories. And as part of the exhibition, I had found an old card catalog, a wooden card catalog, and had a prompt where people would be able to write the memories that they had or write their favorite childhood story in one of the drawers. They could open and close the drawers, and also in the drawers were these little worlds that had toys and miniature things that were reminiscent of childhood. So I think shifting someone into a space they haven't been into before, or they are experiencing in the moment that they hadn't for a long time, is something that is important to me. And one of the ways that I do that is by creating dichotomies in my work, to have certain kinds of confusion where on one hand color might draw someone in, but then as they get closer they'll see that there's something that's not quite just about the color. Or having a line that's reminiscent of the body, but the painting is really abstracted, creating a kind of tension and a push-pull that the viewer will be curious about and possibly disturb, possibly puzzle, possibly enjoy. In terms of my current work, just to tell you briefly, I'm working on a series which was influenced by Matisse. I started a painting that happened very easily, and this was in the last couple of months, and it felt as if Matisse was sitting on my shoulders. The colors were related to Matisse, the use of patterns, the use of stripes were related to Matisse, and there was this kind of hint or this tension between abstraction and still life. As Matisse repeated his paintings often, I have now, I think, 8 versions of the same painting, and I'll continue, each one showing a little bit of a variety, of a difference than the one before it, but starting with a similar compositional structure. Thank you for listening, and I'm grateful for allowing me to share my world. In April, I have a studio in East Orange, New Jersey called Manufacturers Village, and the 20th and 21st there are open studios from 12 to 6 that people are welcome to come to. And in the fall, I will have a solo exhibition for 3 months at Kane University, which I'm very, very excited about, in the Carl and Helen Berger Gallery. And also, just to let you know, because I realized I hadn't mentioned this, I went back to graduate school into an MFA program about a year ago. So again, thank you for listening and joining my world.